100 families rejected this silent cat, until a veteran walked in, and the cat started crying. Fine won the hook. At exactly 10:14 in the morning, the heavy iron gate of Kennel 72 began to vibrate with a sound so piercing it cut through the frantic barking of 30 other dogs. It wasn't a meow, and it wasn't a growl. It was a long, rhythmic wail that sounded disturbingly like a human child sobbing in a dark room. Inside the small enclosure, a charcoal gray cat stood perfectly rigid, its body tensed like a coiled spring, staring through the bars with eyes the color of tarnished brass. The shelter manager, Sarah, dropped her clipboard, the plastic shattering against the concrete floor. She had seen this cat, nicknamed Silence by the staff, rejected by exactly 100 families over the last 3 years. Each time, the result was the same. The family would approach, the cat would stare at them with an unsettling, predatory intensity, and then that sound would begin, that haunting, gut-wrenching cry that made people back away in genuine fear. Silence didn't move a muscle as Sarah approached. He didn't hiss, and he didn't hide. He simply kept his gaze fixed on a point just below her throat, his mouth slightly open, letting out that jagged, sobbing vibration. 100 families had called him cursed, broken, or evil before returning him within 48 hours. Some claimed he stared at them until they couldn't sleep. Others said he seemed to be mourning a death that hadn't happened yet. But as Elias Thorne stepped through the front door of the shelter, the atmosphere changed. Elias didn't look like a man looking for a pet. He looked like a man looking for a reason to stay in the world. He moved with a slight limp, his shoulders heavy with the weight of things he couldn't forget. The moment his boots hit the linoleum, Silence stopped wailing. The cat fell into a sudden, deathly hush that was far more terrifying than the noise. PN2, the character and setting. Elias Thorne lived in a world of muted colors and long shadows. A retired combat medic, he spent his days in a small cabin at the edge of the woods, far from the noise of the city that felt like a constant assault on his senses. He had spent 20 years patching up holes in men and trying to ignore the ones in his own soul. He didn't want a cat. He didn't want the responsibility of another life. But his therapist had been adamant. Find something to care for, Elias, or you'll forget how to care for yourself. The Hollow Creek Sanctuary was a place of last resorts. It was where the unadoptable animals went to wait for a miracle that rarely came. It was damp, smelled of cedar shavings and old fear, and was currently the only place Elias felt he belonged. He wasn't looking for a kitten or a playful companion. He wanted something that understood the silence of a house that had grown too big. He had heard the rumors about the cat in Kennel 72. The volunteers whispered that the animal was neurologically compromised or perhaps viciously traumatized. They told him the cat had been found near an abandoned military outpost, emaciated and scarred, but with a strangely disciplined demeanor. Elias didn't believe in curses. He only believed in trauma, and he knew it when he saw it. Free 3. The escalating behavior. When Elias reached the end of the hallway, he didn't speak. He just stood there. Silence the cat did something he had never done for any of the 100 previous families. He didn't retreat to the corner. He didn't stare at the wall. He walked directly to the bars, his long, lean body moving with a tactical grace that made Elias's heart skip a beat. The cat sat down, perfectly square, and began to sketch in the air with his right paw. It was a repetitive, circular motion, followed by a sharp tap on the floor. Tap, tap, tap. What is he doing? Elias whispered, his voice raspy from lack of use. We don't know, Sarah replied, standing 5 feet back. He does that whenever he gets stuck on someone. Usually, the wailing starts next. Please, Elias, don't get too close. He's lashed out at people before when they try to touch him without warning. Elias didn't listen. He knelt down, his bad knee cracking loudly in the quiet hall. He held out a hand, palm up. Silence didn't sniff it. He didn't rub against it. Instead, the cat leaned forward and pressed his forehead against Elias's palm with a force that felt like a desperate plea. And then, the crying began. It was a low, vibrating thrum that escalated into that high-pitched sob. But Elias didn't flinch. He recognized that sound. He had heard something like it in the middle of the night in a field hospital. It wasn't a cry of pain. It was an alert. 5-4. Wrong theories. The shelter staff had a dozen theories for why the cat acted this way. The most popular was that Silence was spirit-bound, that he saw the ghosts of the people Elias had lost. Others thought it was simple brain damage from an old injury. Some suggested he had been trained by someone who used him for dogfighting, and the crying was a redirected hunting instinct. A local vet had once suggested that the cat was simply vocalizing stress because he couldn't hear the world around him. They thought he was deaf, just like other famous shelter cats who were misunderstood because of their sensory limitations. They tried hand signals. They tried pheromone diffusers. They even tried anxiety medication. which only made the cat lethargic and more prone to staring at the ceiling for hours. "He's just a broken animal, Elias," Sarah said, her voice filled with pity. "He's been returned so many times because people can't live with the noise. It's not fair to him, and it's not fair to the owners. He starves himself in new homes because he misses this cage." But Elias looked at the cat's eyes. They weren't empty. They were hyper-focused. The cat wasn't looking at Elias. He was looking through him, at a rhythm only he could detect. Five mini cliffhanger and seta. As Elias stood up to leave, the cat's wailing reached a fever pitch. Silence threw himself against the bars, not in aggression, but as if he were trying to physically pull Elias back. The veteran felt a sharp, familiar tightness in his own chest, the same pressure he'd felt for months and dismissed as simple anxiety. But when he looked back at the cat, he saw a single, clear drop of moisture fall from the animal's eye. "He isn't broken," Elias whispered, his own hand beginning to shake. "He's trying to tell me something I'm too stubborn to hear." Before we move into the investigation of what this cat was actually trained to do, if you find these stories of misunderstood animals as moving as I do, please hit the like button and subscribe. It helps me bring more of these incredible journeys to light. PN6 Deep Investigation. Elias didn't go home that night. Instead, he sat in his truck in the shelter parking lot, the rain drumming a rhythmic beat on the roof. He pulled out his old military tablet and began searching through restricted veterinary archives and retired canine handler forums. He wasn't looking for shelter cats. He was looking for tactical feline integration. He found a footnote in a 2018 report about an experimental program involving biodetection animals used in high-altitude recon units. They weren't dogs, they were cats, chosen for their ability to remain silent for days and their incredible sensitivity to barometric pressure and biological sense. He sent an encrypted message to an old contact in the veterinary corps. 2 hours later, a file appeared. It contained a photo of a charcoal gray cat sitting on the shoulder of a young sergeant in a desert camouflage uniform. The cat's name wasn't Silence. It was Banshee. The report stated that Banshee was a Tier 1 medical alert animal. He had been trained to detect the scent of isoprene, a chemical the human body releases through the skin when heart rate and blood pressure reach critical, pre-heart attack levels. He was trained to wail as a high-frequency alarm that could be heard over the sound of gunfire or machinery. PN7, Reveal Level 1. Elias returned to the shelter the next morning at dawn. He showed Sarah the file. The room went silent as they read the final entry. Sergeant Miller, Banshee's handler, killed in action. Banshee was the only survivor found at the site. He was found guarding Miller's chest, refusing to leave even when the rescue team arrived. The cat hadn't been crying at the 100 families who rejected him. He had been alerting. He was smelling the stress, the undiagnosed high blood pressure, and the looming medical crises of the people who came to see him. But because they didn't know the code, they thought he was the problem. They thought his warning was a curse. "He's been trying to save people for 3 years, Elias said, his voice thick with emotion, and everyone just called him crazy. But there was one detail that still didn't fit. Banshee had stopped wailing when Elias first walked in. He had switched to a silent forehead press. Why? PN 8 Reveal Level 2. The twist. Elias walked back to Kennel 72. He opened the door himself, ignoring Sarah's protest. Banshee didn't move. He just looked up, and for the first time, he let out a tiny, soft chirp, a sound the report said was reserved for target stabilized. Elias sat on the floor, and the cat immediately climbed into his lap, his weight heavy and warm. Banshee placed his front paws directly over Elias's heart and began to purr. But the purr was different. It was a deep, rhythmic vibration that matched a very specific frequency. Suddenly, the tightness in Elias's chest eased, his breathing slowed. His pulse, which had been erratic for months due to a condition he'd refused to treat after the war, began to synchronize with the cat's purr. The twist wasn't just that the cat was a medic. The twist was that the cat recognized Elias as a fellow soldier. Banshee wasn't wailing at Elias because Elias was in immediate danger. He had stopped wailing because he realized Elias was a medic too. The crying Sarah had heard for 3 years wasn't a cry for help. It was a call for assistance. Banshee had been trying to find another medic to help him carry the weight of the world. Fres9 versus the decision. "I'm taking him home," Elias said. It wasn't a request. "Elias, he's a high-needs animal," Sarah warned. "The legalities of a retired military asset." "He isn't an asset," Elias snapped, his eyes flashing with a fire Sarah hadn't seen before. "He's my brother in arms. He's been looking for a partner for 3 years, and I've been looking for a reason to wake up. We're done waiting." Elias signed the papers with a steady hand. He didn't need a carrier. Banshee walked out of the shelter on a lead, his head held high, his ears swiveling to track every sound. For the first time in 3 years, the The silent cat didn't look at the walls. He looked at the horizon. N10 the aftermath. 6 months later, the cabin in the woods was no longer a place of shadows. It was a place of routine. Every morning at 6, Banshee would tap Elias's chest 3 times a signal that it was time for their morning walk. If Elias's heart rate spiked during a nightmare, Banshee was there, pressing his forehead against Elias's temple until the darkness receded. Elias finally went to the VA hospital. He told them he had a consultant who suggested he get his heart valve checked. The doctors were stunned to find a severe, undiagnosed blockage that would have likely killed him within a year. "How did you know?" they asked. Elias just looked at the gray cat sitting on the chair in the waiting room. "He told me," Elias said, and he doesn't like to repeat himself. The town began to change too. Word of Banshee's story spread, and the Hollow Creek Sanctuary saw a surge in adoptions for difficult animals. People stopped looking for perfect and started looking for purpose. DM11, the emotional ending. On a quiet Tuesday morning, exactly 1 year after the adoption, Elias sat on his porch watching the fog lift off the trees. Banshee sat beside him, his charcoal fur damp with mist. For the first time since the war, Elias felt a sense of profound, unshakable peace. He reached down and scratched the cat behind his scarred ears. Banshee leaned into the touch, letting out a long, contented sigh. There were no more wails, no more crying, just the sound of 2 old soldiers who had finally found their way home. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of the things they didn't need to say, and the lives they had both fought so hard to save. Elias realized that the 100 families hadn't rejected a cat, they had rejected a mirror. They weren't ready to see their own vulnerabilities, but Elias was, and in that vulnerability, he found his strength. The message and STA. Sometimes, the most broken things in this world are actually the ones holding the pieces together for the rest of us. We spend so much time trying to fix those around us that we forget to listen to what their brokenness is trying to tell us. Banshee didn't need a home. He needed a mission. And Elias didn't need a pet. He needed a reminder that he was still worth saving. If this story reminded you that every living being has a hidden depth, please share it with someone who might be feeling a little unadoptable today. Leave a comment below with your own stories of animal intuition. And as always, don't forget to follow the channel for more stories of the invisible bonds that connect us all.